Hey there, it's Crystal Beshara, and today I'm going to be talking about how to mix realistic greens. And I'm wearing green appropriately because I'm in anticipation of my workshop in Ireland, and I want to make sure that you have realistic results when you're mixing your greens. And it can be achieved very simply by using two greens. I never use greens straight out of the tube. That's what gives you that unrealistic result in the end. And people struggle with the use of greens, I think, for that very reason. So I'm using two very common colors as our base, Hooker's Green Dark and Sap Green. For the following recipes, you'll also want to mix in violet, alizarin, raw sienna, burnt sienna, gamboge, which is a warm sort of school bus yellow as I describe it. It's comparable to cadmium yellow medium, ultramarine, Prussian blue, and Hansa yellow, which will be a bright lemon colored yellow. We can use cooler tones by introducing the blues to create recessed or distant tree lines, and we can create a little bit more mood by mixing in violet as well. I'm going to show you how to create some very, very dark, intense greens for shadows, some very neutral greens for base colors in sunnier or even golden hour scenarios, and then you'll see color recipes as well for those citrusy colors that we talked about earlier. So the first color that we're going to mix is to create a dark, moody, bluish green. And I'm using the Hooker's Green Dark as a base here. The color that we'll be adding will be Prussian blue. And we're looking for a pretty dark, rich, saturated color. The next dark green will be Hooker's Green Dark. And then we're going to be adding a violet. I use Vinci violet, but you can use a violet like Winsor violet or a dioxazine violet. This is a very blackish cool green. The final dark green that we're mixing will be our warmest dark green. And again, the base is Hooker's Green Dark. And then we'll be adding alizarin crimson to this. You don't want to add too much alizarin crimson or it will turn a little too brown and we'll lose the feeling of it being green altogether. So you can see here we've switched to sap green and we're moving into our bright earthier greens. In this case, I'm adding raw sienna. It will give us a pretty nice olive green. The next green is sap green, again, as the base. And to make it a little bit richer than the previous color, we're adding burnt sienna. If you add too much burnt sienna and it turns a little too rusty, as in the case here, you just go back and simply add a little more sap green to the mixture. The final mixture here is sap green, but we're going to make it a little bit sunnier this time. So instead of using the earth tone, I'm just going to use the gamboge. So up first we have the mixture of the Hooker's Green Dark and Prussian blue mixed together. The next color we're looking at is the Hooker's Green Dark and violet, much blacker. And then finally it's the Hooker's Green Dark and alizarin crimson. There's that dark, warm green, almost dark brown green. Here's the sap green and raw sienna. And then the difference between the sap green and the burnt sienna. And finally, the sap green and gamboge mixture. So we first looked at mixing colors in the palette and then bringing it to your paper, but now we're going to be looking at mixing color right on your paper. It gives a much different result. Here we've got sap green, and I'm going to introduce ultramarine to it. You can put it beside and slowly integrate it, or you could have dropped the color directly in. Here they are getting mixed together. The ultramarine really grays down the green and gives a slightly more blurry, atmospheric kind of result. Now we'll be looking at the Hansa yellow, which is almost like a lemon-like yellow. I'm putting it down as the base color, and then while it's wet, I'm bringing in the sap green, and then right into that, I'll be mixing in a little bit of the burnt sienna. So the three colors together give you that sort of golden green. Here's the burnt sienna getting mixed in here. I could have used raw sienna as well. Both would be just as beautiful. The next color here we've got is Hooker's Green Dark. I'm adding the ultramarine to it to sort of mute it and cool it. You could use this for distant tree lines. All the colors are wet into wet here, so they're blending together on the surface. I'm adding a little bit of violet, which will of course darken it, but the red presence in the violet will also just change the tone. The next color is the Hooker's Green Dark as a base. And then instead of mixing the Prussian blue directly with it in the palette, I'm actually adding it to the Hooker's Green Dark right on the surface of the paper. This is a really nice technique if you're creating a very hazy or misty tree line. You could use Kleenex or water to blot to make it that much more distant. The final color here, and one of my favorite citrusy green mixtures, is Hooker's Green Dark plus the Hansa yellow. Those two colors just really pop with each other. So that's the full range of greens. Of course, you can come up with your own combinations of colors, but these are really the bases to my entire range of greens. Here you can see them in practice in two little studies, very wet into wet application. Here's another little deciduous tree. You can see the highlights being used in the yellows. I hope you enjoy this video, and I hope it makes your future paintings a little bit more realistic and representational. Thanks for watching, and you can follow my blog posts or my travel on the Wandering Paintbrush page on Facebook, or you can tune into my blog at crystalbeshara.com.